The cold wind howled through the Montana territory as Clementine Archer stood on the porch of her small cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and red. Little did she know that soon, those same colors would engulf her entire world in flames. It was the spring of 1876, and Clementine had been living alone on her homestead for nearly 2 years since her father's passing. At 22, she had grown accustomed to the solitude and the challenges of frontier life. Her days were filled with tending to her small garden, caring for her few animals, and occasionally traveling into the nearby settlement of Pine Ridge for supplies. As dusk settled across the land, Clementine noticed something peculiar: the scent of smoke, stronger than her own cooking fire should produce. Turning toward the western edge of her property, she saw them tiny sparks dancing on the wind, carried from what must have been a wildfire somewhere beyond the ridge. "Not now," she whispered, her heart beginning to race. The winter had been dry and the spring hadn't brought nearly enough rain. Everything around her homestead was like tinder waiting for a spark. Clementine rushed inside, gathering what precious few items she could: her father's pocket watch, her mother's locket, and the small leather-bound journal that contained her family history. By the time she stepped back onto the porch, the wind had shifted, and the distant glow had become a threatening wall of flame approaching far too quickly. She ran to the small stable where her mare was already nickering nervously. Throwing open the gate, she urged the frightened animal out, but the approaching roar of the fire spooked the horse, who bolted past Clementine and disappeared into the darkening plains. Turning back toward her cabin, Clementine could see the flames had already reached the far edge of her property. The dry grass carried the fire faster than she could have imagined possible. Smoke began to fill her lungs as she realized with dawning horror that she might not have a way out. Miles away, Yates Anderson was riding back to the Broken Spur Ranch after a long day of tracking strays when he spotted the distant glow against the darkening sky. The experienced cowboy immediately recognized the danger wildfire, moving fast and headed straight toward several homesteads scattered throughout the valley. "Come on, Echo," he urged his stallion, turning away from the trail home and toward the approaching flames. At 28, Yates had seen his share of prairie fires, but this one looked particularly vicious, driven by the steady spring wind. As he rode closer, he could make out a small cabin directly in the fire's path. Smoke was already swirling around the structure, and in the fading light, he spotted a figure moving frantically around the yard. Someone was still there. Clementine coughed violently as the smoke thickened around her. She had tried to gather water from the well, but it was useless against the approaching inferno. The heat was becoming unbearable, the roar of the flames drowning out even her own terrified thoughts. Her eyes stung with tears and smoke as she realized the fire had circled around, cutting off her escape route to the east. She was trapped, the flames drawing closer, the smoke making it harder to breathe with each passing moment. Then, through the haze, she heard the thundering of hooves approaching from the north. A silhouette emerged from the smoke, a rider on a powerful horse, pushing through the chaos directly toward her. "Hello," she called out, her voice breaking. "Help." Yates spotted the woman through the thickening smoke, her golden hair illuminated by the approaching flames. He urged Echo forward, the trusted stallion responding despite his fear of the fire. They reached the yard just as the first flames began to lick at the edge of the cabin's wooden porch. "You need to get out of here now," Yates shouted above the roar of the fire, pulling his bandana over his nose and mouth. "My horse bolted," Clementine cried back, clutching her small bundle of possessions. "I don't have a way out," the fire was moving too quickly. Even as they spoke, sparks caught the dry roof of the cabin, and within moments, flames began to climb the wooden structure. Yates assessed the situation in an instant. They had only one narrow path remaining through the advancing wall of fire, and it was closing rapidly. Without hesitation, he extended his hand down to the woman. "The fires swallowed her cabin," Yates called to Echo, as if explaining the urgency to his horse, then looked down at Clementine with determined eyes. "Then I'll carry her through the smoke." Clementine looked up at the stranger, his face partially obscured by his bandana, but his eyes clear and steady even in the chaos surrounding them. She reached up, grasping his outstretched hand, feeling the strength as he pulled her up behind him on the saddle. "Hold tight," Yates instructed, feeling her arms wrap around his waist. "Keep your face against my back and breathe through my coat if you can." With one arm holding her secure, he turned Echo toward the only gap in the advancing flames, a narrow corridor that was quickly closing. The horse needed no urging, sensing the danger and their one chance of escape. They galloped through, heat searing their skin from both sides, embers and ash raining down around them. Clementine closed her eyes and pressed her face against the stranger's back, feeling the solid strength there. His heartbeat was steady despite the danger, and she found herself matching her breathing to his as they raced through the inferno. For what seemed like an eternity, they rode through smoke and ash, the roar of the fire surrounding them. Finally, the air began to clear, the heat diminishing as they put distance between themselves and the spreading flames. Yates didn't slow until they reached the banks of Clearwater Creek, where he finally pulled Echo to a stop. "Are you all right?" he asked, turning slightly in the saddle to look at the woman clinging to him. Clementine loosened her grip and sat up, her face streaked with soot, her eyes red from the smoke but very much alive. "Yes," she managed, her voice rough. "Thanks to you." Yates dismounted and helped her down from the saddle. In the moonlight now breaking through the smoke, he got his first clear look at her golden hair falling from what had once been a neat bun, determined green eyes, and a strength in her bearing that belied the trauma she'd just experienced. "Yates Anderson," he introduced himself, removing his hat. "I work at the Broken Spur Ranch about 10 miles north of here." "Clementine Archer," she replied, extending a shaking hand. "That was my homestead back there." Yates glanced back toward the glow on the horizon, the fire still spreading but no longer a threat to them. "I'm sorry about your home, Miss Archer." The reality of what had just happened seemed to hit Clementine all at once. Her home, her garden, the life she'd built all gone in a matter of minutes. She swayed slightly, exhaustion and shock taking their toll. Yates caught her arm to steady her. "You're in no condition to go anywhere tonight. We'll make camp here by the creek where it's safe, and in the morning I'll take you to the ranch. The foreman's wife will help get you situated." Too drained to argue, Clementine simply nodded. As Yates set about making a small camp, gathering what water they could from the creek and laying out his bedroll for her to use, Clementine sat on a fallen log and stared back at the distant glow of what had been her life. "I've lost everything," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Yates paused in his work, looking at her silhouetted against the night sky. "Not everything, Miss Archer. You've got your life, and out here, that's the one thing you can't replace." As the adrenaline of their escape faded, Clementine found herself overwhelmed with gratitude. "How did you find me?" "Why did you come?" Yates handed her his canteen. "I was heading back to the ranch when I saw the fire. Couldn't just ride away knowing folks might be in its path." He shrugged as if what he'd done risking his life to save a stranger was nothing remarkable. "Well, I thank you, Mr. Anderson. I don't know how I'll ever repay such a debt." "There's no debt in helping a neighbor," he replied simply. "Now try to get some rest. Dawn will be here before you know it, and we've got a ride ahead of us." Clementine settled onto the bedroll he'd laid out for her, watching as Yates took his position leaning against a tree, his rifle across his lap, keeping watch. As exhaustion pulled her towards sleep, her last thought was of the stranger's eyes, steady, determined, and somehow comforting even in the midst of chaos. Morning came with the gentle gurgling of the creek and birdsong that seemed at odds with the devastation of the night before. Clementine awoke disoriented, memories flooding back as she took in her surroundings, the makeshift camp by the creek and several yards away, Yates Anderson tending to his horse. "Good morning," he called, noticing her stirring. "There's coffee if you'd like some. It's not fancy, but it's hot." Clementine rose, brushing dust from her smoke-stained dress. "Thank you," she said, accepting the tin cup he offered. The coffee was strong and bitter, but the warmth was welcome in the cool morning air. "I'd like to check on your homestead before we head to the ranch," Yates said. "The fire's burned itself out to the east, and we might be able to salvage something. Hope flickered briefly in Clementine's chest, though she knew better than to nurture it. I'd appreciate that. They rode double again, Clementine behind Yates on Echo, the powerful horse carrying them back toward what remained of her home. The landscape had transformed overnight. Where there had once been green spring grass and wildflowers, now lay a blackened, smoking expanse stretching as far as the eye could see. When they crested the small rise that overlooked her homestead, Clementine's breath caught in her throat. The cabin was gone, reduced to a smoldering foundation of stone and ash. The small barn, the chicken coop, the garden she had so carefully tended all vanished as if they'd never existed. Yates helped her down from the saddle, and they approached the ruins cautiously. The ground was still hot in places, wisps of smoke rising from deeper pockets of embers. Be careful where you step, Yates warned, staying close beside her. Clementine moved through the ashes of what had been her home, occasionally stopping to sift through debris with a stick. Most everything was gone, reduced to unrecognizable char. Near what had been her garden, she paused. My mother's roses, she said softly, kneeling beside the blackened stems. She brought them all the way from Virginia. To her surprise and wonder, at the base of one scorched cane, a tiny green shoot was visible, somehow protected from the worst of the heat. Life finds a way, Yates observed quietly, standing beside her. Even after fire, Clementine touched the tiny shoot gently. Yes, I suppose it does. After salvaging what little they could, an iron skillet that had survived the flames, a few tools from what had been the root cellar, they mounted Echo once more and turned toward the Broken Spur Ranch. The ride took most of the morning, giving Clementine time to process her new reality. She had come west with her father 5 years earlier, after her mother's death had left them both untethered in Virginia. They had built the homestead together, and after his passing she had maintained it alone, determined to honor his dream. Now that dream was ashes, and she was riding toward an uncertain future with a man she barely knew. Tell me about the Broken Spur, she said, breaking the companionable silence that had fallen between them. It's a good spread, Yates replied. About 10,000 acres, running mostly cattle with some horses. The owner's a fair man, Henry Blackwell. He and his wife, Martha, live in town most of the year, so the ranch is run day to day by the foreman, Frank Miller, and his wife, Sarah. And you, what's your story, Mr. Anderson? Yates was silent for a moment, and Clementine wondered if she'd overstepped. Then he spoke, his deep voice rumbling against her where she held onto his back. I've been riding for the Broken Spur for about 3 years now. Before that, I was all over Wyoming, Colorado, even down into New Mexico territory for a spell. My father was a rancher up in Montana until the winter of '67 took him, the cattle, and just about everything else. I'm sorry, Clementine said softly. It was a long time ago, Yates replied, though something in his tone suggested the wound wasn't completely healed. Anyway, I've been on my own since I was 17, working ranches, doing some scouting for the Army for a while. The Broken Spur's the closest thing to home I've had in a decade. Clementine considered this, and now I'm imposing on that home. You're not imposing, Yates assured her. Sarah Miller's been saying for months she could use an extra pair of hands around the place, and with Roundup coming, there'll be plenty of hungry cowboys to feed. As they rode, the landscape began to change, the fire's destruction giving way to untouched grassland. By early afternoon, they crested a hill, and the Broken Spur spread out before them, a collection of buildings nestled in a verdant valley, cattle dotting the distant pastures, and a stream winding through the property. It's beautiful, Clementine said, genuinely impressed by the well-maintained ranch. It's home, Yates replied simply, urging Echo down the slope toward the main house. Their arrival created quite a stir. Several cowboys paused in their work to watch as Yates rode in with Clementine behind him, both still bearing the marks of smoke and ash. Sarah Miller emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as they drew closer. Yates Anderson, what trouble have you brought home this time? She called, though her tone was kind rather than accusatory. Yates dismounted and helped Clementine down. Mrs. Miller, this is Miss Clementine Archer. Her homestead was caught in that wildfire that came through Cottonwood Valley last night. Sarah's expression softened immediately. "Oh, you poor dear, come inside right away. You look half dead with exhaustion." "Thank you for your kindness," Clementine said, suddenly acutely aware of her disheveled appearance and smoke-stained clothing. "Nonsense," Sarah replied, taking her arm. "Any friend of Yates is welcome here." She shot a curious glance between them but asked no further questions as she led Clementine toward the house. "I'll see to Echo," Yates called after them, "and find Frank to let him know what happened." Sarah Miller proved to be exactly what Clementine needed in that moment: practical, efficient, and compassionate without being smothering. Within an hour, Clementine had been provided with a hot bath, clean clothing borrowed from Sarah's daughter who was away visiting relatives, and a hearty meal that reminded her she hadn't eaten properly in nearly 24 hours. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," Sarah assured her as they sat at the kitchen table, Clementine finally feeling human again. "We've plenty of room, and as I was just telling Yates, I've been needing help around here, something fierce with Roundup coming and 20 hungry men to feed." "I don't want to be a burden," Clementine began, but Sarah waved her concerns away. "Burden, child, from what Yates tells me, you've been running a homestead by yourself for 2 years. That's no small feat. You'll be an asset here, not a burden." Frank Miller, the ranch foreman, entered the kitchen, then a weathered man with kind eyes who reminded Clementine somewhat of her father. "Miss Archer," he greeted her, removing his hat. "Mighty sorry about your place. Yates told me what happened." "Thank you, Mr. Miller," Clementine replied. "And thank you for opening your home to me." "Think nothing of it," Frank said, helping himself to coffee from the pot on the stove. "Yates says you might want to ride back out there in a day or two, see if anything else can be salvaged. I'll spare him to take you whenever you're feeling up to it." Clementine felt a rush of gratitude. "That's very kind." "Meanwhile," Sarah added, "you rest and get your bearings. Everything looks brighter after a good night's sleep, even if what you're looking at is still mighty grim." That night, in the small but comfortable room Sarah had provided for her, Clementine found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flames, felt the searing heat, heard the roar of the fire as it devoured everything she had worked to build. Rising from the bed, she moved to the window, looking out at the peaceful ranch yard bathed in moonlight. A figure caught her attention: Yates, sitting on the porch of the bunkhouse, seemingly as unable to sleep as she was. He was whittling something, the shavings catching the moonlight as they fell. There was something comforting about his presence, even at a distance. This man who had ridden into fire to save a stranger, who had treated her with nothing but kindness and respect, who asked for nothing in return for his heroism. Clementine touched the windowpane lightly, watching him for a moment longer before returning to her bed. This time, when she closed her eyes, instead of flames, she saw steady hands reaching for her, pulling her to safety. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Clementine quickly made herself useful around the ranch, helping Sarah with cooking and household tasks. Her knowledge of gardening proved valuable as they expanded the kitchen garden to accommodate the needs of the upcoming Roundup. True to his word, on the third day, Frank assigned Yates to take Clementine back to what remained of her homestead. This time, they rode separate horses, with Clementine on a gentle mare named Daisy that Sarah insisted she consider her own for the time being. "You're a natural," Yates observed as they rode side by side through the greening prairie. "Most city folk take a while to get comfortable in the saddle." "I wasn't always a homesteader," Clementine replied with a small smile. "My father taught me to ride when I was just a girl in Virginia. We had a small farm there before." She trailed off, the memories of her mother's illness and their subsequent journey west still painful. "Before what?" Yates asked gently. "Before my mother died," Clementine said after a moment. "Consumption. My father couldn't bear to stay there afterward with all the memories. He'd always dreamed of going west, so we did. I was 17. Yates nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Loss has a way of setting people in motion," he said. "My father used to say that grief was like a river. You either let it drown you, or you learn to swim with the current." "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was," Yates agreed, stubborn as a mule but wise in his own way. They reached the remains of the homestead around midday. The scene was less shocking than it had been immediately after the fire, but no less devastating. Nature had already begun its work of reclamation. Wind had scattered some of the ashes, and small animals had returned to forage among the ruins. Clementine dismounted, handing Daisy's reins to Yates, and walked slowly toward where her garden had been. To her amazement, the small rose shoot she had discovered on their previous visit had grown visibly, a tiny leaf unfurling toward the sun. "Would it be possible," she asked, turning to Yates who had followed her, "to dig this up and take it back to the ranch? It's silly, I know, but it was my mother's favorite." "Not silly at all," Yates replied, already removing a small folding shovel from his saddlebag. "Family heirlooms come in all forms." Together, they carefully excavated the rose, preserving as much of the root system as they could, and wrapped it in a damp cloth Yates had thought to bring along. They spent another hour searching through the ruins, finding little else worth salvaging before preparing to leave. As they mounted their horses, Clementine took one last look at what had been her home. "Goodbye," she whispered, not to the ashes, but to the dream that had lived there, her father's dream of a life on the frontier which had become her own. Yates watched her, understanding in his eyes. "You know," he said as they turned their horses away, "there's plenty of unclaimed land around these parts. Better land than this, with more water and better protection from the winds. When you're ready, I'd be happy to show you." The offer surprised Clementine. "You think I should try homesteading again?" "I think," Yates said carefully, "that you're not the kind of woman who gives up because the world threw fire in your path. But that's for you to decide." The ride back to the broken spur was thoughtful, both of them contemplating futures that suddenly seemed less certain than they had just days before. When they returned, Sarah helped Clementine plant the rose, cutting in a sheltered corner of the kitchen garden. "It'll thrive here," the older woman assured her. "Roses are survivors, just like certain people I'm coming to know." That evening, as the ranch hands gathered for supper, Clementine found herself watching Yates more carefully than before. He sat among his fellow cowboys, quiet compared to some of the more boisterous men, but respected that much was clear from how they deferred to his opinions, sought his advice. He caught her looking once and offered a small smile that warmed something inside her that had nothing to do with the hearty stew she was eating. The following weeks brought significant changes. Spring advanced across the prairie, and with it came the frenzy of activity that was roundup season. The bunkhouse filled with additional hands hired for the season, and the days began before dawn and stretched long after dusk. Clementine threw herself into the work of helping Sarah feed the expanded crew, learning the rhythms of ranch life, which differed significantly from her solitary existence on the homestead. She found herself enjoying the company, the sense of being part of something larger than herself. She saw less of Yates during this time. He and the other experienced hands were out from sunrise to sunset, bringing in cattle from the far reaches of the ranch's extensive holdings. But the brief moments when their paths crossed began to take on a special significance. A shared smile across the crowded dining room, a brief conversation as he washed up at the pump before supper, the way his eyes seemed to find her first when he returned from a long day on the range. One evening, about a month after the fire, Clementine was hanging laundry on the line behind the main house when Yates approached, leading Echo. The cowboy looked tired but satisfied, his hat pushed back on his head. "Evening, Miss Archer," he greeted her. "Need any help with that?" Clementine smiled. "I think I can manage a few sheets, Mr. Anderson, but thank you for offering. Thought you might like to know," he said, leaning against the fence. "I rode by your old place today, that little creek that runs along the eastern edge. It's flowing stronger now with the spring melt. If the cabin had survived, you might have had flooding troubles." Clementine paused, a damp sheet in her hands. "Are you trying to make me feel better about losing everything I owned?" A grin tugged at the corner of Yates's mouth. "Is it working?" Despite herself, she laughed. "Perhaps a little. There's something else," Yates continued, his expression growing more serious. "I've been thinking about what you might do next." The Millers are glad to have you here. Anyone can see that, but I suspect a woman who ran her own homestead might want something more permanent than being a ranch cook's helper. Clementine secured the sheet to the line and turned to face him fully. I've been thinking about that myself. I have some money saved, not much, but enough to make a start somewhere. There's a piece of land, Yates said, about 5 miles north of here along Cottonwood Creek. Good water, sheltered by a ridge that would break the worst of the winter winds, the soil's rich better than what you had before. And it's close enough to the ranch that you wouldn't be completely isolated. Clementine studied him, trying to understand what he was proposing. Why are you telling me this? Yates shifted, suddenly seeming less sure of himself than she had ever seen him. I thought maybe tomorrow, if you'd like, I could take you to see it. Frank's given me the day off since we've brought in most of the herd now. You want to help me start over? Clementine asked, surprised by his continued interest in her welfare. I want you to have choices, Yates replied simply. And selfishly, I'd prefer if one of those choices kept you nearby. The implication of his words hung in the air between them. Clementine felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. I'd like that very much, she said finally. To see the land, I mean. Yates's smile returned genuine and warm. Good, we'll leave after breakfast. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect for assessing potential homestead land. Clementine found herself taking extra care with her appearance, wearing the one dress Sarah had helped her make since coming to the ranch, her hair neatly braided and pinned. Sarah noticed, of course, but said nothing beyond a knowing smile as she packed them a lunch to take along. Frank was less subtle, clapping Yates on the shoulder as they prepared the horses and saying loudly enough for Clementine to hear. About time you showed interest in something besides cattle and horses, Anderson. They rode north along Cottonwood Creek, the landscape growing more beautiful with each mile. Yates pointed out landmarks, sharing stories of the area and its history, showing Clementine places where wild berries grew in abundance, where the fishing was best, where deer often came to drink. By the time they reached the piece of land he'd described, Clementine was already half in love with the area. When they crested a small rise and she saw the valley below sheltered by gently rolling hills, the creek winding through stands of cottonwood trees, meadows lush with spring grass her breath caught. It's beautiful, she said simply, reining Daisy to a stop beside Echo. It's good land, Yates agreed, though he was watching her face rather than the vista before them. The valley provides protection from the worst of the weather. The creek never runs dry even in August, and the soil's rich enough to grow just about anything you'd want to plant. They dismounted and led the horses down into the valley, Yates showing her the best spot for a cabin elevated enough to stay dry during spring runoff, but protected from the winter winds by the northern ridge. Why hasn't anyone claimed this already? Clementine asked, running her hand through the rich dark soil near the creek bank. It was claimed briefly, Yates explained, standing beside her. A fellow from back east tried to make a go of it about 5 years ago, but his wife couldn't handle the isolation. They moved on to Oregon, I heard. Since then, it's just been sitting. The filing fee at the land office wouldn't be much. Clementine looked around, imagining what she could build here: a cabin larger than her previous one, a proper garden, maybe even an orchard in time. The dream her father had pursued transformed into her own vision. Of course, Yates continued, seeming suddenly nervous again, building a cabin alone is a mighty task. You'd need help. Are you offering, Mr. Anderson? Clementine asked, a smile playing at her lips. I might be, he replied, meeting her gaze directly, if you'd be amenable to the assistance. They spread the lunch Sarah had packed on a blanket beside the creek, talking about possibilities as they ate what crops would grow best, where to position a root cellar, how many acres might be cultivated in the first year. You seem to have given this a lot of thought, Clementine observed as they finished their meal. This isn't just about finding me a piece of land, is it? Yates was quiet for a moment, looking out over the valley. No, he admitted finally. It's not. Then what is it about, Mr. Anderson? He turned to face her, his expression more open than she had yet seen it. Since the night of the fire, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, Miss Archer. Your courage, your determination, the way you've handled losing everything without once giving in to despair. Clementine felt her heart quicken. You've been very kind to me. It's not kindness, Yates said, his voice low and earnest. At least, not only that. I've known many brave people in my life, but none that made me want to build something lasting, something real. And that's what you want. Clementine asked softly, something real, with you? Yes, Yates replied simply. I know it's sudden and you hardly know me, but Clementine surprised herself by reaching out to touch his hand, stopping his words. I know enough, she said. I know you rode into fire to save a stranger. I know you've thought of my welfare before your own at every turn. I know when I look at you, I see a future I never imagined for myself, but one I find I want very much. Yates turned his hand to clasp hers, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. I'm not asking for promises, Clementine. Just a chance to see where this might lead. I believe, she said, smiling now, that it might lead right here to this valley, to a home we could build together. The surprise and joy that transformed Yates's face was something Clementine knew she would remember always. For a moment he seemed at a loss for words, then finally said, I've been a wanderer most of my life, never thought I'd find a reason to put down roots. And now I can't imagine being anywhere but where you are. Their return to the ranch that afternoon was marked by a subtle but unmistakable change in their relationship. They rode closer together, their conversation easier, punctuated by shared smiles and moments when their hands would brush as they pointed out features of the landscape. If the Millers noticed the change when they returned, they had the good grace not to comment directly, though Sarah did remark that the fresh air had brought a becoming color to Clementine's cheeks. And Frank suddenly discovered reasons why Yates's skills would be needed close to the ranch house rather than out on the range for the next few days. Those days became a time of planning and preparation. Clementine and Yates rode into town to file the claim on the land, officially registering it in her name. While there, they spoke to the lumberyard about materials for a cabin, visited the general store to price tools and household goods, and began to assemble the foundations of a new beginning. News of the fire had spread through the small community, and Clementine was touched by the genuine sympathy offered by strangers. When they learned of her plans to rebuild, many promised help offers of labor, gifts of seedlings, promises of furniture once the cabin was completed. I'd forgotten what it was like, Clementine said as they rode back to the ranch after their second trip to town. Being part of a community, I mean, after my father died, I kept to myself mostly. It seemed easier. And now, Yates asked. Now I'm reminded that easier isn't always better, she replied. There's strength in having people around you who care. The following weeks were a flurry of activity. Work began on the cabin site, with Yates coordinating help from other ranch hands during their off hours. Clementine drove herself equally hard, working with Sarah to preserve food for the coming months, sewing curtains and linens for the new home, and spending every moment she could at the building site. By late summer, the cabin was taking shape larger and sturdier than her previous home, with proper windows ordered from Denver and a stone fireplace that would keep the interior warm through the harshest winter. Yates had insisted on a covered porch that wrapped around two sides of the structure, for sitting and watching the sunset, he explained, though Clementine suspected he simply wanted to build something special for her. Their relationship deepened through the shared work and purpose. Evenings often found them sitting on the ranch house porch after supper, discussing plans for the next day, but inevitably drifting into more personal conversations, childhood memories, hopes for the future, quiet confidences that built the foundation of something more enduring than the cabin they were constructing. One such evening, as summer was giving way to early autumn, they sat watching a spectacular sunset paint the western sky in hues of gold and crimson. Reminds me of the fire, Clementine said softly, though beautiful instead of terrifying. Yates nodded, understanding. Nature's got a way of being both destroyer and creator. Same sun that burns can also grow. I've been thinking, Clementine said after a comfortable silence, about what happened that night. If the fire hadn't come, if you hadn't ridden by when you did, we might never have met. I've thought about that too, Yates admitted. Not that I'm glad your home burned, mind you, but I can't help but be grateful for where it led. Clementine looked at him then, studying the strong profile illuminated by the fading light. Where do you think it's leading, Yates? He turned to meet her gaze, his expression serious. I think you know. I'd like to hear you say it, she replied, her heart quickening. Yates reached for her hand, holding it between both of his. I love you, Clementine Archer. I think I started falling the moment I saw you standing in that smoke, refusing to give up even when everything around you was burning down. I want to build a life with you, not just a cabin, but a home, a family, a future. Clementine felt tears welling in her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. I love you too, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. I never thought I could feel this way about anyone, especially not after losing so much. But you've shown me that some losses open the way for greater gifts. Yates released her hand only to reach into his pocket, withdrawing something small that caught the last light of day. I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment, he said, opening his palm to reveal a simple gold ring with a small pearl set in its center. It was my mother's. I'd be honored if you'd wear it. Are you asking me to marry you, Yates Anderson? Clementine asked, though the answer was already written in her smile. I am, he confirmed. Though I don't have much to offer beyond my hands, my heart, and a half-built cabin. That's everything I could want, Clementine replied, extending her left hand. Yes, I'll marry you. The ring slipped onto her finger as if it had been made for her. Yates lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, then drew her close for a proper kiss there first, but holding the promise of a lifetime more to come. Word of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch and into town. Sarah immediately began planning a wedding celebration, insisting it should be held at the Broken Spur before they moved into their new home. Every bride deserves a proper send-off, she declared, even one who's only moving 5 miles away. The cabin's construction accelerated with the announcement, as if the entire community had taken a personal interest in seeing the couple settled before winter. Additional hands appeared on weekends, townspeople, neighboring ranchers. Even the blacksmith closed his shop one Saturday to help with the more difficult ironwork for the fireplace and hinges. Through it all, Clementine found herself watching Yates, the way he coordinated the work without being overbearing, how he valued every contributor's skills, the respect he showed to everyone regardless of station or background. Each observation only confirmed what her heart already knew, that in this man, she had found not just a savior from the fire, but a partner for life. The wedding was set for early October, when the worst heat of summer had passed, but before the unpredictability of winter weather made travel difficult. The date coincided almost perfectly with the cabin's completion, allowing them to move into their new home immediately afterward. As the day approached, Clementine found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months, from the devastating loss of the fire to the unexpected joy of finding love among the ashes. The rose cutting she had salvaged from her mother's plant had flourished in its new location and even produced one perfect bloom as if in blessing of the upcoming union. The wedding day dawned clear and cool, with just enough crispness in the air to hint at the changing season. The Broken Spur's main house and yard had been transformed, lanterns hung from trees, tables set up for the feast to follow, and the ranch hand's bunkhouse temporarily converted into additional space for guests from town. Sarah had insisted on helping Clementine prepare, bringing out a gown that had belonged to her own daughter, ivory satin with delicate lace trim, altered to fit Clementine perfectly. Something borrowed, the older woman said with a smile, placing a wreath of late wildflowers on Clementine's golden hair. Though I suspect my Emma would say it's yours to keep. Frank Miller had offered to stand in for Clementine's father, an offer she accepted with genuine gratitude. As they waited in the main house for the signal to begin the ceremony, Frank cleared his throat awkwardly. Miss Archer, Clementine, I just wanted to say that your father would be proud of you today. Building a life from nothing once is impressive. Doing it twice after losing everything, well, that takes a special kind of courage. Clementine squeezed his arm. "Thank you, Frank. That means more than you know." Outside, the guests had gathered in the ranch yard where an arbor had been constructed for the occasion. Yates stood beneath it, looking more nervous than Clementine had ever seen him, even when they were racing through fire. He had traded his usual ranch clothes for a proper suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven. When the fiddles began to play and Clementine appeared on Frank's arm, a collective murmur of appreciation rose from the assembled guests. But Clementine had eyes only for Yates, whose expression transformed from anxiety to wonder as he watched her approach. The ceremony itself was simple but heartfelt. The local minister spoke of building foundations that could withstand any storm, of love that grows stronger through adversity, of two lives joining to create something greater than either could achieve alone. When it came time for the vows, Yates took Clementine's hands in his voice steady and sure. "I promise to stand beside you through fire and flood, through plenty and want, through joy and sorrow. I promise to help build our dreams into reality, to listen when you speak and hear what remains unsaid, to love you more with each passing day." Clementine, fighting back tears of joy, responded in kind. "I promise to face whatever comes with courage and faith, to make our house a home filled with warmth and welcome, to respect the man you are and support the man you strive to become. I promise to love you completely and without reservation, today and all the days to come." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, cheers erupted from the gathered community. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, a proper Western wedding with abundant food, music that had even the most reluctant guests taking to the makeshift dance floor, and enough good wishes to last a lifetime. When the time came for the newlyweds to depart for their new home, they were escorted to a wagon decorated with ribbons and flowers. Inside were gifts from the community, practical items for their household, luxuries that would have taken months to afford on their own, and mementos that would remind them always of this day and the people who had shared it. Their arrival at their cabin now, was a moment of quiet joy after the excitement of the day. Yates insisted on carrying Clementine across the threshold, a gesture that made her laugh even as it touched her heart. "Welcome home, Mrs. Anderson," he said, setting her gently on her feet in the main room, where a fire had been prepared in the hearth earlier that day and now cast a warm glow across the simple but beautiful space they had created together. "It's perfect," Clementine said, turning slowly to take in every detail: the sturdy walls that would protect them from winter storms, the windows positioned to capture the best views of their land, the furniture they had gathered piece by piece over the preceding months. "Not quite," Yates replied, going to the small table beside their bed and picking up something wrapped in cloth. "One last thing." He handed the bundle to Clementine, who unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small wooden box intricately carved with roses and vines. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the detailed work. "Open it," Yates encouraged. Inside, nestled in a bed of soft fabric, was the iron key from her original cabin, blackened by fire but still recognizable. "I found it when we went back that second time," Yates explained. "Thought you might want to keep it to remember where you came from." Tears welled in Clementine's eyes as she lifted the key. "How did you know exactly what I would need?" Yates drew her close, his arms encircling her waist. "Because I've been paying attention from the first moment I saw you. Because knowing what matters to you matters to me." Clementine set the box carefully on the mantel, where the key would serve as a reminder not of what she had lost, but of the journey that had brought her to this moment, this man, this life. "I love you, Yates Anderson," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "And I love you, Clementine Anderson," he replied, the name still new and wonderful on his tongue. "More than I ever thought possible." Their life together unfolded like the seasons, each day bringing new challenges and joys, each month building upon the foundation they had created together. Winter found them snug in their cabin, planning for spring planting as snow piled against the windows, and the fireplace Yates had built with such care kept them warm through the longest nights. By spring, Clementine had news that brought a new dimension to their happiness. A child would join their family before the year's end. Yates's reaction, a moment of stunned silence followed by a whoop of joy that startled the chickens in the nearby coop, was something she would treasure always. Their daughter, Sarah Rose, was born as autumn painted the cottonwoods gold, a strong, healthy child with her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes. As Yates placed her tiny form in Clementine's arms for the first time, he whispered, "Another beautiful thing that came from fire." And so it was that 2 years after the night when flames had taken everything Clementine thought she valued, she found herself richer than she could have imagined with a husband who loved her completely, a daughter who embodied their hope for the future, land that responded generously to their care, and a community that had embraced them as their own. On the anniversary of the fire each year, they would make a special journey to the site of Clementine's original homestead. What had once been ashes was gradually being reclaimed by nature, grasses growing taller, wildflowers returning, even young trees taking root where the cabin had stood. "Life finds a way," Yates would say, echoing his words from their first visit after the fire, "even after destruction." And Clementine, looking at the thriving land they now called home, at the growing family that filled it with laughter and love, at the man who had carried her through smoke to a future brighter than she could have dreamed, would always reply, "Yes, it does, especially when it has help." As their family grew, Sarah Rose eventually joined by a brother named Frank Thomas, and later a sister called Elizabeth May, and their prosperity increased. They never forgot the lesson of that fateful night, that sometimes what appears to be an ending is merely the beginning of a different, more beautiful story. The rose that Clementine had salvaged from her mother's garden flourished in its new home, spreading to create a hedge that bordered their front path, greeting visitors with beauty and fragrance through the spring and summer months. Like the love that had blossomed between a desperate homesteader and a brave cowboy, it had survived fire and transplanting to become something stronger, more enduring, and more beautiful than before. And on summer evenings, when the work of the day was done and the children were tucked safely in their beds, Yates and Clementine would sit on the porch he had built for watching sunsets, their hands intertwined, their hearts still filled with gratitude for the fire that had destroyed one dream but made possible another far greater than either could have imagined alone.